Welcome, everyone. My name is Andrew Cardozo, and I'm president of the Pearson Center. As many of you will know, the Pearson Center is a progressive think tank that addresses the big economic and social policy issues of our times. And in that context, I'm pleased to welcome you to the 11th webinar on major issues relating to COVID-19 and how it is affecting our society. Today, we will discuss the idea of basic income. Is this the time? It's an idea Canadians have been debating for some years, but with CERB and other large government programs, people are asking if what we have now and what we're doing right now is a lot like basic income or guaranteed annual income, as some people will call it. I want to take a moment to thank our sustaining sponsors, without whose help this type of webinar would not be possible. They are Canada's building trades unions and the International Association of Firefighters. I also want to welcome socialcanada.ca as a co-host for today, who helped design the discussion. Today's guests are Sheila Regehr, who is chairperson of the Basic Income Canada Network and a Canadian leader in advancing the idea of a basic income. She's a former executive director of the National Council of Welfare. Senator Frances Lankin is an independent senator from Ontario. She's been the CEO of United Way of Toronto and a New Democrat MPP and minister in Ontario. Robert-Falcon Ouellette is a former Liberal MP for Winnipeg Centre and has served on the House of Commons Finance Committee, which is of special interest to our discussion today. He is also an associate of the Pearson Center. Today, Terrance Hunsley will be moderating the panel with me. Terrance is a senior fellow at the Pearson Center and a leading Canadian expert on a range of social policy issues. With regards to the format, the discussion will last about 45 minutes, and then we will have time for a Q&A with you, the audience. And we will end promptly at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So please use the question box on your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we can. The session is being recorded and will be posted on the Pearson YouTube channel later on this afternoon. And with that, over to you, Terrance.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Just a quick correction that Social Canada uses the website socialcanada.org. And it's an information service for people who are interested in social issues, social services kinds of issues, community issues, and social policy. And we're delighted to be doing this with the Pearson Center at this time. It's my pleasure to start this along with Sheila Regehr, the chair of Basic Income Canada Network, and I suggest we refer to it as BICN maybe for this session once we get used to that acronym. And Sheila, over the last couple of years, there have been a number of models that have been put forward and discussed for either guaranteed income or basic income of one form or another, notably one by former Senator Hugh Sigel, a model by the former Ontario government and the establishment of some basic income experiments in the province. Those experiments were terminated when the government changed and the new government went into place. But also notably, just 2 days ago, we had a report issued by the Parliamentary Budget Office costing a basic income model that was based on the theoretical extension of the Ontario model to the rest of Canada. So now, though, BICN has sort of changed its priorities by any means, but perhaps its emphasis, and has put forward one specific model that you think is right for now and obviously ongoing. It's right for Canada at this time. So maybe you could just let us know sort of why you focused on this model now, and then show us some of the details so that we all can focus on a similar concept to discuss.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm really, really pleased to be here and in such great company. So I'm going to start with a little bit of backstory very quickly to describe the BICN evolution. And I think Hartley's got slides that he may put up to help this along. Okay, so if we look at the first slide on evolution, so this is moving very quickly from 2008 to 2020. You see that slide, Hartley, the next one? So anyway, he'll find this. So when we started out, and many of us, including Senators Hugh Segal and Art Eggleton at the time, and Tony Martin with the NDP in the House of Commons, we're working on issues like this and discovered a North American network. So when we created BICN in 2008, many of us had already been in this for a while. What we were then, and still are now to a certain extent, is a pretty big tent organization. Very few people were talking about basic income then. So for us, anybody who was interested in discussing this from a theoretical perspective, a philosophical, there are mathematicians involved, there were some activists, but it was a big tent. And then as we started looking more specifically at who we were in Canada, we thought, some of these models don't fit Canada, and they don't fit the kind of principles we want and the things that are important for us. So we developed essentially a policy document called the Basic Income We Want. So it outlines our principles, and those principles include things like working against poverty, improving equality, and being progressive. So some of those principles we could actually measure in our modeling, which I'll show later. One of the most important things about Canada, and Terry, you hinted at this earlier, that Canada's got a lot going for it. And when we got into this and realized that part of the policy context in Canada includes seniors benefits and benefits for families with children that have a lot of basic income characteristics, we thought, wow, we really are ahead of the game. Our next iteration, and this is very recent, we put out our policy options document, as you mentioned, with 3 different options going from a guarantee model, which I'll talk about again, to the full-on kind of model that Andrew Yang is promoting that is a demogrant. Everybody gets the same amount of money, and you kind of sort it out at the end of the tax year, what the end result of that is. We really didn't want to be prescriptive at that point, and I think some others are at that point now too. We're investigating a number of models. We wanted to know that we could do this, that we could design a progressive basic income in different ways, and we wanted the government to know it had options. We don't tell you you have to do it this way or it's no good. There are options. And then just a few months later, COVID hit. And we decided that we needed to be a little bit more prescriptive now and determined that in this time, at this moment in COVID, based on where we are, we needed to move now. We couldn't wait, and so we promote a single option. Another part of our context now is, of course, COVID-19 and CERB. What COVID-19 has done is shown us not that there's anything new. We knew there were weaknesses and gaps in our system, but it has magnified them, and it has made it more important for us to address them because many more people are affected now. CERB tried to fill some gaps. You know, it's great that the federal government showed this kind of leadership. Finance and the CRA showed that they can adapt really fast when they need to, when the political environment sort of forces that to happen. But there are design flaws with CERB. We know that people receiving are really grateful for it, but they're very anxious about losing it. They're really worried about those who can't get access to it. And then there is this flaw that it starts to penalize employment at one point that a basic income actually resolves. When all of this exploded and interest in basic income exploded, one of the things we faced was that there ended up to be many ideas on the table now. A lot of them, quite frankly, written on the back of table napkins. A lot of people hadn't done their research, but they had opinions, they had ideas. And again, that was where we thought we needed to kind of step in and address this confusion by honing in on one model. So if we look at the next slide, it will show you essentially how this works. So back up one, Hartley, please. Okay, there seems to be something missing in the middle. And maybe I've got this backwards. Okay, so yeah, advance, and we'll see where we are. Sorry. All right. Okay, so what we focused on is gap for 18 to 64-year-olds. Again, in our modeling, because seniors and children's benefits are working well, we want them to stay in place. We want to focus on the group that has been left out. Our modeling uses a benefit level for single people of 22,000. So that's very similar to the CERB amount, and we support that CERB amount now. We also noted we can get into the weeds of modeling forever. There are a lot of perversities in our tax system, and modeling this kind of basic income for anybody is really difficult. And one of the things that kept happening because of the wonkiness in the system was that seniors were getting penalized, particularly single seniors, in the transition from what we have now to a basic income. So this model increases benefits for seniors too, to make sure that they're getting the same as younger adults. Our reduction rate is 40%, so that means as you earn additional income, you get to keep the majority of it, but your benefit starts reducing. Ours is a little bit more gradual than the Ontario model, which was 50%. And in our model, very deliberately, we made sure that the benefit extended up into the middle income brackets. We are concerned about poverty, and that's a huge problem in Canada, but income security is too. People who think they're middle class aren't protected the way they used to be. And there's vulnerability there that COVID has really highlighted. The way we funded our models, and this is where our report really stands out from just about anything else that's been done so far, is that we show how to fund it. And we do it in a very particular way to make sure that it remains progressive. We do it through the tax and transfers because we can model that. But our report highlights very much that this is not, again, the only way to do it. There are other funding sources. And for people who are interested in the details, I really do encourage you to read the report. I mean, not just all of the number details, but it goes into very extensive descriptions of the reasons for all of the decisions we made. There is nothing accidental in this report. So the next slide shows what everybody asks about, which is how much does it cost? So here is the cost for this one. This option is 134 billion. And in looking at how we find the money for that, we went through all of these tax transfer programs. We changed all of the things that you see on the slide here, and we can discuss, some of that finer detail if you want later. But we made sure everybody was contributing. Upper income deciles, corporate tax, non-refundable credits that benefit people who have tax to offset, but don't benefit people who earn very little or none. So that was important. And with those changes and with those tax fairness changes, we generated 136 billion. So all of our models, and in particular this one, they are paid for in our modeling. We all know that if we have a basic income, it's going to supersede social assistance. We designed a provincial contribution kind of formula. It was really difficult. When we first started out, we realized that according to traditional formulas, we'd have Quebec ending up subsidizing the rest of Canada, and thought that politically probably wouldn't go over very well. Because we have such different regimes across the country, our only other option would have been to design 10 completely different kind of models, and we thought that didn't make sense, so we tried to create a formula that was fair. And then the final bit here talks about the change in disposable income, so that it shows that there was a huge impact in the lower income deciles, and that the upper income deciles contribute their fair share. And if we look at the graph on the next slide, it shows you, this is what I call the flattening the income inequality curve. So you see the gray line is the basic income. It starts out substantial and then fades out gradually. The purple line is, you know, a fairly steep curve at the bottom end and at the top. You see people in that highest decile really pulling away from the rest of us. The top 1%, we all know, is even worse from that perspective. And then you see the green line. So it's a slightly flatter curve. It makes an enormous, enormous difference to people at the bottom end, especially single people. And it doesn't, when you look at this graph, you can see that it doesn't create pain for those who have income. It really doesn't. It's a very gradual reduction and gets us back just ever so slightly closer to the kind of fair income tax rates we used to have. So now the final answer to the question initially, why this action and why now? Very quickly, we saw that there were clear political signals that nobody wants this universal idea where everybody gets money and it goes to people who don't need it. So this kind of option makes sense. The other two options still might be on the table down the road, but right now where we need to act, this option makes the most sense. The evidence supports it from everything we know. And I feel very strongly about this, that we are in multiple crises. I mean, we really are on this kind of razor's edge of change, and we have an opportunity to do something that will make things much better. And if we don't, I fear that it really will get much worse, you know, for people and the planet. There's no going back to old normal now. Thank you.
Sheila, thank you very much. Very clear presentation. I have just a couple of things that I've noted. One is that the total cost of the program you put at 136 billion, and I just did a little checking with Dr. Google and found out that that equals about 6% of GDP, which would be the kind of total transfer of income that you're proposing, in essence, from the top half of the income scale toward the bottom half of the income scale, with some overlap in the middle there, obviously. A couple of questions. People who I've talked about, one of the first questions that usually comes up is, what does this mean for social assistance programs? And I'm not sure if I read your model correctly, but it seems to me that you're talking about replacing the social assistance cash transfer parts of social assistance that provincial governments currently give, but that not doing anything in relation to services or to special subsidies for particular situations that provincial programs may have now. Is that generally accurate?
That is correct. We folded the social assistance cash part of things into the funding sources for this basic income. We also folded in half of the administrative costs. Social assistance is extraordinarily onerous to administer, and most of it has to do with policing money and policing people's behavior. And with a basic income, you don't do that anymore. But we do recognize very clearly that there are people who are going to need ongoing supports. They're going to need services, and they are going to be delivered, we expect, much better through a system that's designed by and with clients and social workers to really deliver the supports that people need, not tied to the same people who have the income axe hanging over your head. So we think this is a win-win for everybody. And we agree that, I mean, major public services like health and education and specialized public services certainly are going to be needed. And we think they could be designed much better when the income problem is taken away.
Right, thanks. I'm going to move now in just a moment to Senator Lankin, but I just want to give the panelists an opportunity if there's a particular question of clarification that they would like to pose to you before we go on to their commentary. Any questions from either of you? I'm not seeing a response. Oh, good. So, Senator Lankin, you co-signed a letter to the Prime Minister on behalf of 50 senators, I believe. And in that letter, you really called for the CERB, the emergency benefits, to be transformed into something that you called a crisis basic income. And you also specified in the letter that your group of senators felt that that should be followed up by a continued effort to reform the income security system in the country. Mm-hmm. But you did stop short of saying that a basic income was the way to go. And so I'm just wondering if you could kind of clarify what were the thoughts of the group and the reasoning behind the way that you express these concepts.
Well, thank you, Terrance, and thank you to the Pearson Foundation for inviting us together. And please call me Francis. I think that the group, as you mentioned, 50 senators all coming together behind one particular approach and position and recommending it to the Prime Minister was quite extraordinary. And Sheila already mentioned that there is a base within the Senate of people interested in basic income from the days of former Senators Art Eggleton and Hugh Segal. And currently, and I think she's online watching this, Senator Kim Pate has been leading an inquiry in the Senate starting last year. We're a bit interrupted by COVID now in terms of what we can accomplish in only the emergency sittings that are happening. But Kim has been leading this initiative, and more senators have been joining in, learning, and working with people in their own communities to understand those local impacts and to bring that kind of feedback into the group as a whole. In this letter, we stopped short, and quite honestly, it's tactical. This was a time where we saw a tremendous opportunity with the government's quick response in initiating and putting a foundation in place called CERB. And we were, I think, echoing Sheila, we were all very grateful to see them move that quickly. And that's a very important program they've put in place. But we could see very quickly that there were people who were falling through the gaps yet again. And if anything, this has shown us even more so the reason why we need to do a complete overhaul, that our systems aren't working of equal opportunity of benefit for all Canadians. So the thought that, there was 3 months of CERB, we knew that there would have to be a reinitiation, continuation of CERB at the end of the 3 to 4 month period. And we wanted to stimulate thinking that this was an opportunity to move CERB to a basic income platform. It would, and the appeal of doing it on a crisis basis, we had hoped, would be that we might be able to draw more allies from across the broad political spectrum to support that, because there have been people from the left and the right who have been arguing that a crisis basic income is an appropriate way to go. And there has been criticism from some political pundits about, do we build disincentives to work? And so the whole idea of a program that has a reduction rate, as Sheila was talking about in her papers, to show that we were paying attention to that. Now, let me say, and Sheila will speak about this at some point, I'm sure, there is absolutely no evidence to support a basic income being a disincentive to work. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. And there's lots of materials people can read. We don't have that time in a 1-hour call. But that's the reason why we stopped short of saying, do it now. And we also were speaking to people inside government. And while there was resistance in finance, there was support from other parts of government, and we tried to open a door that we hoped they would step through. And as things have unfolded, that hasn't happened, but there's still opportunity because this is, we know, going to go on for a while. The other thing that I just want to comment on, and Sheila was talking about this in terms of social assistance, a number of years ago, back in 2011, 2012, I had the opportunity, along with Munir Sheikh, who's the former head of Stats Canada, to co-lead a commission studying reforming social assistance in the province of Ontario. And many of the same issues arise. You know, as you talk about how do you help people with the supports and services that are needed for them to live a healthy life with, you know, families with children or single people. How do you help them get the skills that they need to be able to re-enter the workforce if that's a possibility? How do you connect them to employment? And the whole range of the benefit structure is a really important underpinning to that. And at that time, well, our focus was Ontario. We also felt that looking at the federal benefits and the range of benefits, and this was, you know, at a time where there was discussion about the working income tax benefit and about child benefit, those sort of fundamental pieces, just not quite there, but a really great start. So I think that there is a complete alignment with people who would like to see a more client-focused social assistance system that is focusing on the supports that people need, take the cash supports out, move it to a national program. And I think what's so exciting right now in terms of the attention and the level of debate is that we are finally moving more and more of us to a common model. You sort of asked that question in your introduction with Sheila, and I think it's been really important because we talk about guaranteed living income, we talk about basic income. For a long time, we talked about universal basic income. There's some organizations that are still talking about that. But I think that we are coming to an agreement that for Canada today, a basic income that is administered through the tax system, that has an appropriate reduction rate that helps people still get a leg up and doesn't punish them for going for finding employment, and smooths that transition, and one that is targeted to the lower income, and as Sheila said, reaching with a reduced rate up into the lower middle income, is the right thing for Canada today. So the question, basic premise of this webinar is it time? And I would say yes, and COVID has shown it to be long overdue and to be a potential solution to a wide range of issues that have come to light yet again. The other thing that I just want to mention, along with Kim's work on the inquiry on basic income, we also have on the floor of the Senate right now a motion to establish a committee to look at the future of workers and the gig economy. I raise this because these things are not unrelated. As we see more and more jobs moving away from the traditional employer-employee relationships, not having security, benefits, health, drug, pension, there's a whole change in that economy that has happened, and it primarily affects, not exclusively, but primarily affects lower end, and as we can see, we've now started calling them essential workers, although that there are professions that have moved to that contract model as well. And one of the potential solutions that we think will come forward as we look at the challenge around the future of workers and the stability that we need for our families and our communities and our economy, one of those solutions would probably be a basic income. While there are other things like a national pharmacare program, other sorts of issues that we need to surround that with to deal with the insecure, precarious workforce that is developing. They mesh together very nicely. So the Senate's in an interesting place, consumed with these kinds of dialogues right now.
Thank you so much, Francis. And you being well aware of provincial programs and also obviously of the federal system that we're in, you know that I guess our history has been such that when we have wars or depression or that sort of thing, the federal government comes usually to the forefront, and we've had the introduction of, in the past, of widows' allowances, which became old age security, the introduction of a progressive income tax system, these things which have been put in place usually during a crisis and then have been adopted as ongoing programs. So I'm just wondering what you think in this situation, given the fact that the federal government really finances by far the majority of income security in the country, if you consider the whole population. But provincial governments are very important players in this. And do you have any idea of how that would this kind of a program would play out with provincial governments?
Well, I think that's a patchwork. It always has been in many ways, and I think it's a patchwork right now in terms of what the response would be. My home province of Ontario, as we know, canceled the pilot project on basic income that had been put in place under the previous government. And there has not been a lot of room to have discussions with the Ontario government at this point in time. On the other hand, in British Columbia, we see a group of experts having been brought together to develop a report on how they could go about doing an effective pilot of basic income there, and PEI is doing work as well. So there are willing and unwilling partners. Yeah. I think that the kind of model that Sheila is talking about and the upfront recognition of subsuming the provincial cash payments into the federal income security system, and down the road relieving provinces of that, although we know it all comes through very complicated Fed-Prov territorial fiscal relationships, and it would get sorted out along the way. But I think that there would be some attractiveness to all provinces for that. I think that the design is critical there to gain support from those people who almost instinctively in a knee-jerk way say, oh well, it'll be a disincentive to work. We have to prove those points again and again, and I think the design that Sheila's talking about addresses that. And if we can get through to people in showing that, there will be more provinces who I think would be enamored with this idea. I just want to mention the third major issue that we've been doing some work on in the Senate that I've been involved in. There are many other issues that people are working on, has been for us to start to take a look at Fed-Prov territorial fiscal transfers, because it's not just equalization and stabilization, it's health funding, it's a whole range of things that are so complicated for us to understand and for us to source the revenue to do the kinds of program redesigns that we want. So we need to uncouple in order to rebuild, redesign, and move forward.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move quickly, though, to Robert. Sheila, I will come back, but I want to get Robert to comment, because Robert, as a long-time advocate for the advancement of rights of Indigenous peoples, and also as a former MP, you advanced at one point proposals to sort of renew the Manitoba Mincome experiments, if I recall right. And so this is, I suspect this is not a new subject for you, but where do you see this proposal going?
Well, thank you very much. I'm coming from Treaty 1 territory, which is the heart of the Métis Nation and the home of all Manitobans, right here in Winnipeg. But I think the whole idea surrounding a guaranteed basic income for Canadians or any human being around the world is one, it's extremely important, but I think we have to get back to why it's important. I think we often talk about the theory, but I come to a story when I was doing my door-to-door in 2016, when I was running for, or 2015 actually, when I was running my first election to become the federal MP for Winnipeg Centre, which is one of the poorest ridings in the country. And I was in a working class neighborhood, and I knocked on a lady's door, and she ended up telling me about her experience in Mincome, which was an example of a basic guaranteed income, which was done back in the 1970s. And previous to that, she had been on social assistance with a lot of the constraints that we were talking about that Sheila had mentioned, and some of the bureaucracy that people put in place to try and control people and how they spend money and what they do with their time. But with the basic income that she was able to receive in the 70s, she decided to go back to school to upgrade her own skills. She went to university, got herself a bachelor's degree. And once she was done with that, she was able then to get a job as a librarian, support her 3 young kids, and then able to pay taxes. She was able to participate more fully in society, but she had options. And the options, she was actually not only able to build, capital or money, she was actually then able to also build social capital, because all her sons have gone on to successful careers. One is an engineer with a master's degree, another has a master's degree, and the other son was a small business owner with their own families that they're doing very well. And that's an example of a lady who, is not very rich, is a working class, neighborhood, but who was able to lift herself out by not being forced to go in and working perhaps at jobs or in going to certain training that wasn't of interest, but was mandated by people making decisions who really don't understand how people think or what people actually want to accomplish with their own lives. And we all benefit from that. And I think the challenge that we're going to face when we start moving forward is there is a reticence or a push by the finance officials, which I discovered when I was on the finance committee, to not really want to look at a basic guaranteed income. They're very, very nervous about this. And I think they're nervous because they're unsure about how it might come out, the final costs. Sheila, actually, that's an amazing presentation showing that the cost would be 136 billion, and we could save 134 billion overall by rejigging how we do other support programs. But I think when I spoke with finance officials, they were very, very nervous about this, and we had a study that was put forward to do a study on the House Finance Committee, and the finance officials, I must say, pushed back fairly significantly. We were just putting in place the Canada Child Benefit at the time, and they said, please don't, let's not do the study on this. Let's just focus on this, and we'll try and make this the best possible. We'll consider putting in increases for the children. We'll make sure that even if you're on social assistance, the children and the families will not have a clawback, which was negotiated by the finance minister, Bill Morneau, with the other provinces, which was a significant change, I think, for a lot of very low income families. But now we're here today, and I think COVID has been an accelerator in our society, pushing things forward. And I think this is a very interesting time. And I think the Senate should not delay. I'm not sure what the House of Commons is going to do, but if the Senate wants to undertake a more significant study, I think they should do so. And I encourage those senators to push forward with this, because when I look at the history of the last Parliament from 2015 to 2019, we undertook a study on pharmacare under the leadership of 2 MPs, Doug Olson and John Oliver. And, we looked at the actual costs and how much a pharmacare, drug plan would cost for all Canadians. And we saw that there were actually significant savings for the Canadian economy. But that was a 2-year study, significant. You had to force officials to give up documents. You had to force officials to rethink about how we're going to do it, and rethink, make the cabinet rethink about public political policy decisions, and it ended up becoming part of the platform. Obviously, COVID probably has put that to the wayside for a little bit. Hopefully, it'll come back very soon. But I think the Senate could make a very significant challenge in pushing forward with this. And it's significant because it would make a huge difference in people's lives, give them the tools to make their own decisions. And I'll just say before I stop speaking, I think the challenge though is always going to be the middle class, and it's going to be that dichotomy between the conservatives and the liberals. One, people are lazy and going to take advantage of the government, and the idea that it's going to cause an increase in taxation for all Canadians. And I think the middle class is going to be under significant challenges in the next few years. Right now with the CERB, I think everything's very calm, but once that measure is no longer in play or no longer government policy, and it's going to be ending very, very soon, when people are unable to afford food or pay their mortgage payments, they're going to get very, very nervous, and demands are going to start being put forward. And I think this is the time to have some of that groundwork done by senators, whether they do it in isolation, but trying to find a way of really pushing the Parliamentary Budget Office to come up with even better costing, because Sheila, your report that you have is significantly different from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the PBO, which came out with a report. We need to have a better handle on these numbers and ensure that we have a better idea of what these numbers actually mean and what potential outcomes would look like. And in relation to Indigenous peoples, they've often been pushed to the side. There's just a newspaper report that came out that 1/3 of Indigenous workers are looking at losing their jobs due to automation in the next few years. That's significant. And at COVID, we know has been an accelerator for a lot of things in our society, use of technology, more distance learning, but it's also probably going to be an accelerator in the automation for companies trying to get away from using workers, such as Amazon trying to use less workers because of the dangers that come with it. So I'll finish off with a quick little quote from 1967 from Dr. Martin Luther King. And he wrote in his book, I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. I noticed earlier Sheila had a quick or an intervention. I don't know if you had a question for Francis or for Robert.
I don't know that I can do anything quickly, but I just think Francis and Robert have made just so many important points about how this is actually good for provinces. It's good for municipalities. The problems they're dealing with relate to the fact that people don't have income security. So, I think that's a huge selling point. Robert's human stories. I mean, there are so many cases like that of people who could do so much with their lives. I think that's just.
But I think we have to trust people. I think that's the problem. Is people sometimes say, they say it's so theoretical, but there are actual examples of real human beings, Canadians, who have taken their own initiative to improve their lives without government telling them what to do. They just give them the tools and say, you go do it. And, when you're successful, come tell us about it. And, Dr. Edwin Forget, I'm sure everyone knows, and from Manitoba, did some really great research on this. And this, while it's anecdotal, my story, there are statistics that, researchers have been collecting and would show that this is in fact actually doable and would probably benefit more Canadians than not.
Mm-hmm. Now there is, I'm going to suggest, I'll throw this out to anyone, including Andrew, if he wants to. There is a cost, and Sheila, the BICN model, I believe, showed that basically up until something above the middle income range, up until maybe the 60th percentile, this model doesn't show anyone paying any more on a net basis. But after that, there is a cost, and for people, I think at the very top end, if I remember right, there's something like a net of about $12,000 increased taxation for people at the top. And obviously, there needs to be some political leadership, I think, to do a selling job on that basis. And I just wonder if any of the panelists feel that that is a major obstacle, or if there is a particular way to go about that. Any comments on that?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think that it is an obstacle in terms of political will. So the work that's going on now in these discussions and all of the articles that I'm seeing in newspapers and things that I'm seeing posted on social media are phenomenally important, because we need to broaden the debate out to Canadians. And again, that's one of the reasons why our approach from the 50 senators was to talk about crisis CERB, because Canadians today can relate to CERB. And can relate to the possibility of it being an ongoing thing. We're happy to call it, a basic income. It's got a different design, but they can relate to that. And so I think this is a very important moment to push the discussion and broaden the discussion through networks like Sheila's and all of the local networks. I think that's very important. I also think it's important that some of the modeling has been done that has shown, where you can, from other sources of revenue, reallocate in ways you can do that. And we talk more often rhetorically. Now, I know that there are people who have done really good research on this, but the broader concept of understanding what are the savings in our other systems, in our healthcare system, in our education system, what are the increases in the workforce productivity, in our economic well-being as a country, writ large, and those benefits accrue to people right across the income scale. So, if we're having problems in some health systems and practicing hallway medicine, all of us that go to the hospital want timely and effective response. If we unburden our healthcare system in some ways by more wellness approach and preventative approach, which it's right at the front of that is poverty reduction. There are also, environmental issues and other things that we have to embrace as part of the bigger solution here. But I think that again, the question, is this the right time? I think this is the time that we have to keep pushing and broadening the understanding and getting some really solid work done on the kind of reductions in costs in healthcare and other places, and the kind of upside benefits in the economy, so people can see a fuller picture. And it's going to take that, I think, to move the political will needle.
Right. I want to just check with Andrew here now, and I don't know, Andrew, you've been monitoring what's been happening, and I'm not sure if there have been any questions that might have been submitted by listeners.
We've got a number of questions, so rather than me chip in here, I'll just go to some of the questions and we'll try and get to them. So panelists, you have a lot of wonderful stuff you've given us so far, but you're going to have to do it a bit tighter from here on. So for a couple of questions, and I'll start with Sheila. What is the rationale for excluding seniors from the program? And second question to you as well is, isn't what you're proposing a reform of the Canada Workers Benefit, adding an unconditional payment and making it considerably more generous?
So the answer to the latter question is sort of. The other description I've heard is that if you take the seniors GIS and just lower the age limit, then you've got it fixed too. So, those are fairly simplistic explanations, but it helps you understand, what this really is about. Our option 2 includes seniors. So it treats all adults alike. Disentangling the seniors programs now is quite complicated. It has a combination of OAS, which is a demo grant, and GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, which is the kind of guarantee we're talking about. Those two things kind of confuse and counterbalance things. When you try to model a basic income, it takes a lot of work to work that out. I think down the road, that's probably a good way to go, to treat all adults the same. But again, we're in a crisis moment. We really need to do something for the people who have so little income security now. And we have a way that we can move forward right now to do that. And develop further better programs as we go.
Okay, Francis, with regards to rents, does basic income fuel rent increases, and should we also be looking at increasing the amount of housing at the same time?
Probably yes, and yes. So does it fuel rent increases? Well, there's no doubt we have seen, even when at times when minimum wage has been increased, that landlords will move to increase rents, and they've often moved to offset other kinds of programs that government have put in place to help low-income people by increasing rents. That's not everyone, but that is an experience that we have seen. That's not the only reason that we need to increase the supply of affordable housing. Again, we see the crisis of families that are so close right now to losing their housing, and the alternatives are so slim, and that's why you see a lot of effort being put into and calling on extending programs that perhaps have been used for the self-isolation for periods of time, using hotels and others that are empty this time, to try and create more emergency housing for people who are homeless chronically, and who are crisis driven, experiencing crisis-driven homelessness. I think that the expansion of supports that we need to intervene to put around families are much clearer seen when we get the poverty issues, the income insecurity issues out of the way. And quite frankly, and while I'm very much in favor of a national homelessness and housing program and its expansion in the areas of things that have been done in the past, a lot of that does fall to provinces and municipalities. And again, if we can get the policing of the social assistance check out of the domain of the province and the cities, it allows for a refocusing on a client-centric set of programs that meet the needs of people as they are trying to re-enter into economic stability.
Okay. Robert, federal-provincial relations, what's the federal government have to do to get does the federal government have to get the provinces on side?
I think that's going to depend on whether it's a Conservative or a Liberal or NDP province. I think that's going to be very significant. We've already seen in Manitoba, there's been a huge pushback by the Conservative government there against CERB, or the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, saying that it disincentivizes work, that they've even put in place an incentive to counteract the CERB, saying if you go to work and stop taking the CERB, we will pay you the money you would have lost. And I think this is actually going to be part of the battle lines for this issue. When you heard Bill Morneau yesterday with these budgetary update with $343 billion deficit, the Conservatives are starting to take an attack line on that. I think this is going to be a very significant battle line, and I think this. I think Canadians though can look beyond petty politics, and I think they can look for the common good. But I think they need to look at the common good when they're facing the abyss of not being able to afford food, or can't find a job, or can't find the right type of work for their skills, because companies just don't have the cash on hand to move forward. We know that there's a lot of restaurants closing, and to be honest, I was just walking around Winnipeg, and I have to say I'm so surprised the number of empty storefronts in the downtown core in Winnipeg. A lot of companies have just handed over keys and said, landlord, I'll take my equipment, and maybe I'll think about starting my restaurant another day. I think this represents significant challenges, because that employs a lot of workers, a lot of young people, a lot of young people who have young families even. And we're going to have to find a way of reconciling all these things. Not everyone works for the government. Not everyone works for a large corporation that has deep pockets. But we have to find a way of getting income to people so that they feel supported, that mental health is good, and that we continue to get help where it's actually going to be the most beneficial for our society.
Thank you. Sheila, how does the model proposed support the additional expenses experienced by people with a disability?
That's a great question, and it shows the difference that is made by the amount of the benefit level. In the Ontario proposal and the one that the Parliamentary Budget Office costed, they are looking at 70% of the low income measure. No, 75% of the low income measure. So you're not quite getting up to the poverty line, and that's the basic income for everybody. And then they have a disability top up. I forget the amount.
I think it's 7,000.
But it wasn't large.
Yeah.
It's not large. In our modeling, we took the decision, again explained in the report, that we wanted a basic income high enough that everybody should be able to meet basic needs, including people with disabilities. And this includes a lot of people with disabilities that are episodic, that are invisible, people who don't want to declare their disability. And then for other issues that really relate to medical and, really expensive needs, those things need to be treated as the medical issues they are. So that if you need expensive medications, if you need assistive devices that are very costly, that's not part of a basic income. That should be part of a program that helps you meet that need.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to do something.
I just want to add one thing here. Even in the CRA, we talk about disability, the Canada Revenue Agency, the taxman. The policing or the verification and the control of people who have disabilities by the Canada Revenue Agency is significant. There are significant costs to it. And if there are ways of simplifying those systems, we can save money for everyone and get the resources to people who actually need them and let people make their own decisions.
And any thoughts, Robert, of the work you've been doing, whether there are considerations in the modeling about for residents on reserve?
So we know for Indigenous peoples that often the social benefits on reserve are actually significantly less than what you might find elsewhere. Also, there are a lot less social support. So for instance, food, there's less food banks on reserves. I think this model would actually give people more opportunity to make their own decisions concerning even, for instance, going to school and getting an education. A lot of Indigenous students just don't have any funding and don't have the social capital or know anyone who might be off reserve in order to go stay at someone's house. And they would be able then to make their own decisions and get, the education they need to, if they want to go back to the reserve, they can go back and start their own types of jobs and employment and improve their local community or stay in the city or go back and forth. But we don't really have a system which is very supportive. And it's always the lowest cost possible denominator. We push people not just below the poverty line, but to extreme poverty levels where they just don't have any options, even concerning housing, where they can't even buy a few materials to fix a broken window or repair or get some, just to buy a can of paint because they just don't have any income at all to do the upkeep or repairs on some of their own places that they're residing and living.
Yeah, okay. We're out of time. I'm going to do something unorthodox. I'll give you each a minute to comment, but I'm going to throw out a couple of questions. You can comment on those or anything else you'd like. So number one, could the panel comment on the Ontario pilot program? And number two, do you think we can have basic income as a patchwork given that different provinces will have different approaches? So in a minute or so, Sheila, you first.
Okay, answer to the Ontario pilot. It was great. We learned enough. We don't need any more pilots. My parting message, I think, two of them. One is to the Department of Finance. All of the money that goes into the basic income goes back out into the economy. And they need to understand that in an environment where you're trying to rebuild. And remember what the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have themselves said, the cost of doing nothing is worse. The cost of not doing a basic income is worse.
Robert, thank you.
I think like pharmacare or Medicare, when Canada didn't have any healthcare, free healthcare for Canadians, I think it starts out as a patchwork. I think one province is going to have to take the lead to implement it and get it going, and then it's going to have an impact on other places when they see the benefits from it. And I'll just leave with poor people actually spend their money on the economy. They don't put it in the bank account and save it. They go out and they put it on things like shoes for their kids, pencils, going out to a restaurant once in a while, participating in their local communities. And they just don't keep the money and put it away where it doesn't do any good to people. They actually generate economic benefit to other people because they need to, because they have less disposable income available and they spend it on essentials.
Thank you. And Francis?
Well, thank you. I agree with Sheila's comments on the Ontario pilot. I agree with Robert on the provincial patchwork, maybe where it gets started. I'm going to come back to, once again, the question that we were asked, is this the right time? And I believe it is. But to get there, we need to engage people in this discussion. We need to talk to our friends, our neighbors, our communities, create places to talk about, are you accessing the CERB? How is it working? How, would you approve or would you support initiatives that looked at how we build this into the structure of all of the various income supports that we have in this country? It needs to be a dialogue outside of just political and academic and advocacy group discussions. We need to move to Canadians and engage Canadians in this discussion, and the time for it is now. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Sheila Regehr, Senator Lankin, and Robert-Falcon Ouellette. This has been an awfully thought-provoking discussion. I think in this crisis, it really is an opportunity for Canadians to think not too long, but deeply about how we can take the benefits we have of this country and improve some of these major issues. Thank you to Terrance Hunsley and Social Canada, and to Hartley Witten for your production today. As usual, I just want to tell our audience about 3 webinars coming up very quickly. On July the 14th, next Tuesday, we have a conversation with Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna. The topic is infrastructure is a key element of economic recovery, and she will be discussing this with Brian Gallant, a member of the Pearson Center's Advisory Committee and the former Premier of New Brunswick. On July 17th, which is a week Friday, we have a conversation with the Chinese ambassador to Canada, Mr. Tsung Peiwu. The moderator of that discussion will be Professor Jonathan Kaloff, also a member of the Pearson Center Advisory Board, and they'll be discussing all the issues that are important to Canada-China relations, including COVID. And lastly, on October the 11th, we will have a conversation on COVID, economic recovery, and immigration with the Immigration Minister, Marco Mendicino. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us, the audience. Please keep in touch. This session will be posted on our YouTube channel later this afternoon. Please keep in touch. And to our speakers again, thanks very much. Since you can't hear the applause coming from out there, I'm going to ask you also to clap for each other as we close out.
Thanks.
That was really good. Thank you, everyone.
Great.